Welcome back, sleepy soul. Tonight, I am your storyteller, ready to drift you into a deep and peaceful sleep. Before we begin, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe for more scary stories. I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what time it is there, so please let me know in the comments. Also, if there's a particular story you'd like to hear next, feel free to suggest it. I was the last plane in the air that afternoon, a Cessna Caravan stitching gray sky to white earth with a thin propeller thread. I'm Jolene Hawthorne, bush pilot by necessity and habit. My cargo was flour, diesel additive, mail rubber banded in tidy stacks, and one crate of oranges so bright they looked like contraband sunshine. Destination: Kotabu, an Inupiaq village tucked where the river slows and the sea ice holds its breath. The radio should have greeted me with the usual static peppered joke about coffee. Instead, a long hiss like a sleeping animal. Kotabu traffic, Caravan 75, 10 miles southeast, inbound. No reply. I told myself the radio was out and kept ascending. The strip showed as a pale bar on the tundra. I flared and kissed down. When the engine wound to silence, the cold stepped closer, careful and patient. No snow machines idle by the door. No dogs. No smoke. Only a sky the color of an old bruise and a wind that pushed without sound. The terminal door was unlocked. Diesel and coffee scented the air. A cup sat on the counter, brown ring frozen to the rim. Hello. My voice bounced off plywood and came back thin. On the corkboard, a note pinned with a fishhook read, "Do not stay after the long shadow. It takes the voice first. Go to the river and keep moving." I stared until the words felt colder than the room. I tried the base radio. Static swelled, and under it something almost like breathing. I set the mic down gently, as if noise had weight. Outside, Kotabu waited with its windows frosted blind. A child sled lay upside down by a step. I wiped a clear circle on a window with my glove. Inside, bowls laid for dinner, a pot on the stove, a chair knocked at an angle like someone stood too fast. Evacuations leave notes and tire tracks. This looked like a sentence cut off mid-word. The top letter in the mail crate was addressed to Isaac Tigluck, General Delivery. I knew him. Fisherman, patient hands, quiet laugh. I slid the letter into my pocket and walked toward the river because the note told me to, and because doing nothing out here feels like drowning. On the riverbank, the wind carved low white dunes. Two snow machines were half buried. A parka moved behind them. "Don't echo," a voice called. It sounded like gravel and ice. "It's Jolene," I said, each word small. "Supply run." He rose slowly. Frost filmed his beard. When I recognized him, I felt relief like heat. "Isaac," I said, and the air tightened at the name, as if some listener leaned closer. I swallowed the second syllable. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "It listens." "What listens?" "The shadow," he answered, so soft the words seemed to make its own cold. "We have stories for many things. This is not a story." It took the voice first. "Where is everyone?" We crouched in the lee of the machines. He poured tea from a thermos with shaking hands. The steam rose and then curved aside, like it remembered another path. "At first it was the usual winter tricks," he said. "Shapes in corners, eyes making faces in coats on chairs. We cleaned lamps. We talked and sang so the silence would not crowd us. Then the dogs started watching doorways and growling with their chests low. The radio hummed between channels. People began to lose words mid-sentence, as if a mouthful of air had turned to glass. They would begin to answer and simply stop, eyes wet, like the words had been taken before they were spoken. "It takes the voice first," I said, hearing the fishhook note in my head. He nodded. "It lived along edges, door frames, mirror rims, the line where light meets dark. If you stared straight, you saw nothing. If you glanced past, you saw what you wanted most, and it pulled. 2 nights ago, the storm paused. Many left for relatives down the coast. Some said, "Our house is our voice. We don't run." In the morning, they were outside, laid gentle in the snow. No marks, no frostbite. Their mouths held a shape like a word that had frozen in place. "Why didn't you go?" "My machine didn't start," he said, with a dry smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Or it started and I forgot." The lines got thin, between inside and out, between breath and word. I kept one lamp on. I didn't say my name. "We should get to the plane," I said. "Engines beat weather if we catch the window. No one can send a chopper. We can come back with more people and more light." "Engines are cleaner than mouths," he said. "We move quiet. We use the houses as windbreaks, walking heads down, not letting our eyes catch in windows where reflections felt too deep." The clinic door had charcoal scrawled, "Do not answer when it says your name." The letters had blurred into the wood, as if the grain tried to swallow them. My voice rose in my throat like a hiccup. I forced it down hard enough to make my ribs ache. At the strip, the caravan waited with frost feathered along its seams. Inside, the plastic and gauges looked sane. I flipped the master. Needles jumped. The radio shrieked a thin climb that made my teeth hurt. I killed power. The shriek kept threading the air, faint and insistent, as if wire were singing. "We keep the lights small," Isaac said. "We keep breath steady. We wait." He pulled a tarp over the windscreen. I cracked a chemical heater and felt it blossom in my palms. We opened the oranges and split one. The bright smell cut the diesel taste of the world. We wrote on a scrap of cardboard to keep from speaking. He wrote, "Do not tell stories." I wrote, "Why?" He wrote, "Stories have names. Names are doors." The pencil marks began to smudge under the point, as if meaning was wet. We stopped writing. The hum outside braided itself from many thin sounds. A plucked wire, a long breath, a good night through a wall. The radio, though off, coughed and produced my name in my mother's voice, just the shape of it, warm from old kitchens. My hand rose by itself. Isaac clamped my wrist and shook his head. It tried with other voices. My first instructor saying, "You got it, kid," only without the smile you could hear. A friend's laugh that was almost right. The exact tone my engine makes when a mixture leans too far. Each was close enough to bend me toward answering. The closeness was the danger. Hours in the north lie. The bruise-colored sky did not move, and the wind kept scraping the fuselage in little paws. We dozed in turns. During my watch, I lifted the tarp a finger's width. A shape stood beyond the wingtip. Not person, not animal, an absence with weight. It leaned, and the leaning felt like a hand on my shoulder. I fixed my eyes on a bolt head on the panel and counted until tears came. "It wants what we give," Isaac whispered, words so small they barely existed. "We give it nothing." The heater sighed to nothing. Cold found the old paths along seams and cuffs and walked them slowly. Somewhere near the clinic, a door swung once and never closed. The radio woke again and said my name in 2 halves, taking it syllable by syllable. The second half dragged like a sled. I bit my tongue and tasted iron. Pressure built and then, slowly, loosened, as if a breath had been held for hours and finally released. The hum thinned. The sky shifted toward a paler shade. Not day exactly, but memory of day. I brought the master back on. Gauges rose without shaking. The radio sulked quiet. I switched to emergency. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," I said, and my voice sounded like something I'd borrowed from a shelf. I gave her location. I did not give our names. The reply was faint but human. A helicopter out of Nome was diverting. "Hold position," the voice said. "Beacon acquired." We held. When the helicopter arrived, Blade Thump shouldered the air, shaking down snow from the plane's spine. Two medics in white parkas ran low, efficient and kind. They clipped us into sling seats. The crew chief leaned close to be heard. What happened? I looked past him at Kotabu. From above, the village arranged itself like always, roofs stitched into white. But the longer you looked, the more edges leaned the wrong way. Light bent oddly along porch steps. Straight lines wanted to slant. I said, "We need to go." They flew us to Nome and into brightness and questions. A doctor took my temperature while a trooper asked for a short version. My voice frayed after 2 answers. They called it strain, stress, cold. I drank broth that tasted like mercy and kept my words small. Isaac sat with his hands flat on his thighs, palms down, as if he were holding something steady that could not be seen. Days later, word reached us that most of Kotabu had made it to shelter farther up the coast. Frostbite, quiet, long stares. No trace of those who stayed. The team brought back pictures. A cup with a frozen ring, a bent jack, the fishhook pin, the note blurred where fingers tried to keep it clear. I folded a copy into my pocket and kept it there like a prayer that did not say a name. I still fly. I still bring oranges where winter eats color. Now, before I key a mic, I pause and pay for words with a heartbeat. Sometimes the radio cracks and a voice leans close and says my name in a way that feels almost right. The almost is the knife. I turn the volume down and hum a tune with no words. Sometimes on the edge of sleep, I feel the long shadow leaning at the hangar wall. It is not a legend. It is geography. When I see Isaac in town, he nods. We do not say much. Names are heavy. He told me once, quietly, that an elder called it a hunger for lines. The lines between house and night, breath and word, person and person. The old hunters, he said, knew to cut their breath into small pieces on certain nights, to give the dark nothing to follow. Maybe we forgot. Maybe the dark remembered. In the weeks after, the story moved in pieces, on freight runs, over coffee, between people who knew not to make a show of fear. An elder from up the coast said their grandparents had a phrase for it. A long shadow that eats the lines we draw between ourselves and the world. You close lamps, cover mirrors, cut your breath into small parts, and do not answer to any name until morning. That advice sounds simple until the dark borrows the voice you miss most. I fly. I bring oranges where winter eats color. When the sky loosens, leave. When it tightens, give it nothing. We survived because we kept our names, our breath, and silence. A quick announcement here. If you're still here and enjoying these stories but haven't subscribed yet, please take a second to do so. Drop a comment too. It really helps push the video out to more people. Your support means everything, and it truly makes my day. I came to Nome for ice, fish, and a story to take home to Texas. A video of the contest had hooked me. Bright huts on white glass, trophies taller than a kid, locals grinning like frost didn't bite. I wanted the kind of cold that sharpens a person. They told me to listen to the ice. It talks, the woman at the gear shop said, handing me an auger and a stern look. Mostly it says, mind your step. I learned words, overflow, spud bar, pressure ridge, rented a hut near the tent, bought coffee strong enough to live outdoors, and promised I wouldn't be the guy they had to rescue. Contest morning felt like walking into a postcard that hit its teeth. My breath turned to wool. Huts dotted the bay. A whistle blew, rules were shouted, and we drilled. When the auger bit through, the sound was clean, like knocking on a door that always opens. I cleared slush, dropped my jig, and waited. At first it was just fishing, tiny pulls, a flash of silver, the calm that comes when all you can do is breathe and watch. The bay lay still, a white ear listening to our small human noise. Then the ice began to hum. Not crack, not pop. A low tone rose through my boots and spine, as if the bay had grown strings and someone drew a bow across the sheet. The walls trembled enough to make the world feel fragile. The hum climbed and thickened into something I could almost call a voice. My line drifted sideways, though there was no current. Through the hole, the dark water gathered a skin like mirror and shadow. My jig became a small bright moon, then slid toward me without moving. The ice sang again longer. It felt like the note wanted an answer. I said, "Hello," because I'm polite in stupid moments. The hum layered on itself, thin threads weaving into a bigger sound. It made shapes in my teeth. Beneath it came a murmur, the half-speech you hear through a wall. It held syllables that could have been words if I leaned closer. I leaned closer. The water swallowed my reflection. Something rose without breaking the surface. It was the idea of a fish drawn in smoke. It had a head because my brain said it should, and a place a mouth ought to be. Where an eye belonged, light shifted like it hadn't decided. The shape opened the knot mouth and let the hum out, and the meaning was simple. Hunger, cold, come. I yanked my line up so fast my glove burned. The jig popped free and rattled. Outside, a snow machine streaked past, then turned hard toward shore. I lifted the flap a finger's width. Across the bay, anglers stood with heads tilted, listening the way you listen for your name in a crowd. The contest tent bulged and settled as if the anchors pulsed. A crewman walked stiffly, as if wading through mud. A woman near me backed from her hole like a dog, turning mean. The hum climbed one more shade, and my heart wanted to match it. I breathed wrong on purpose, short in, long out, to keep from sinking to that note. When I looked back into the hole, more shapes moved beneath the skin of water. They were fish the way a dream holds a house, close enough to fool you, wrong enough to wake you. Fins formed and failed. Tails smudged and reappeared. They slid under my hut and past it. Wherever they drifted, the murmur braided into half phrases like someone trying to speak with numb lips. Phrases reached us in pieces. Hold rope. Go home. Then the bay tried my name in my own voice, soft as a porch greeting. Hearing yourself when your mouth is closed does a trick on your bones. I almost answered. The shape nearest the hole paused, waiting for me to give it the rest of the sentence. Off the ice, the director's voice was small against the big sound, but his arms made the point. People moved, not a stampede, more like cattle shift before a storm, steady, eyes wide, feet careful. Gear hit snow. Augers lay where they fell. A man tried to carry his heater, then dropped it and ran as if the metal had grown teeth. I stepped outside, and the hum came into open air, colder and larger. The sheet flexed under us like a giant turning. A crack unzipped somewhere with a sound like far thunder. I saw dark water in the gap, smooth as glass, ready to erase anything that met it. Crews laid a plank near shore. Nobody argued about who went first. Near me a boy stood too still, smiling at his hole as if someone he loved had just said his name. I took his sleeve. "Come on, bud." He didn't move. "Your grandpa would want you with him," I said. That broke the spell. He blinked and followed. I didn't let go until we crossed. From shore I turned back because that's what people do. We look at the thing we're leaving even when looking hurts. The field of huts sat on the white like toys. Below, the knot fish rolled slow, pressing a holes, tasting air. Every few seconds the hum bent toward a human vowel and almost became a word. The almost was worse than any scream. Sirens came thin and real. The clinic opened. A local elder spoke into a radio. Her voice didn't fight the hum. It slid along it. "The sea keeps many voices," she said. "We should not answer when it borrows ours." We filled the school gym. Volunteers poured coffee and kept people from being alone with the sound in their heads. The contest paused for conditions, which meant for fear. The bay hummed through the walls for a while, then faded, or we got louder, or memory sifted over it like snow. That night, I lay on a cot and pictured the shape under the ice. This was not catfish or carp. This was a choir of shadows asking for our words, so it could sing like us. I slept a little and dreamed a Texas dock. The lake said howdy in my voice, and I woke with a laugh that wasn't a laugh. Morning looked normal. The huts were still there. Gear lay where fear had dropped it. Teams went out with bars to check thickness. The elders said some winters are louder than others, and we should be quiet so we don't tread on old paths. At the edge, I listened. The sheet was quiet except for honest cracks, the kind of talk the shopwoman promised. But if I held still, I could feel a leftover note in my teeth, a memory pitched onto the world. I decided I'd heard enough. I thanked the crews and said I'd come back for my deposit when the bay felt like a floor again. At the airport, the agent asked, "Catch anything?" "A story," I said. On the plane, I watched the white bay smooth into a sheet, huts like sprinkles. Back in Texas, folks asked if Alaska was as cold as they say. I told them it was a clean cold that wanted respect. When they asked if I won, I said I left early that day. When a kid begged for something scary, I told him about a hum that tried to speak in a voice like his own. I left out the part where I almost answered. I still fish on weekends. When the line goes slack, I check the hook and think about how a shadow might shape itself around a small bright thing. Some nights, when wind slips under the door and makes that narrow whistle, I hear the old hum and picture people walking away from good gear like it's nothing. I pour coffee, sit still, and let the sound pass. If I go back to Nome, and I might because pride has a long memory, I'll keep a plank near shore and my mouth shut. I'll listen more than I talk. If the ice sings again, I'll feel the note in my fingers and save the rest of my words for another day. I don't think the bay wanted to hurt us. I think it wanted something we carry without thinking. Our chatter, our comfort, our names. I plan to keep mine. This is what I caught. A hum, a shadow fish that never showed skin, the way a town can move like one body when old forces stir. I caught a boy turning back because a stranger lied with care. I caught the moment my own voice came up through a hole and asked me to step closer. And I caught myself stepping away. If you ask what I learned, I'll say it plain. When the ice calls you by name, you don't answer. You walk. You leave the gear. You keep your voice. I was stationed in Bethel for 6 weeks, hired to maintain a satellite relay station the size of a double wide, and just as lonely. Out there, radios and antennas were my only neighbors, their static voices filling the hours between supply drops. People think the wilderness is silent, but that's not true. The wind never shuts up. The river cracks like it's breaking ribs under the ice. And sometimes, the radio speaks when it shouldn't. The first time it happened was a Wednesday. I remember because Wednesdays were inventory nights. I was counting vacuum tubes when the distress channel sparked alive. A man's voice, trembling. "We're trapped near the Kuskokwim Bend. Plane went down. Please, anyone. Our fuel's almost gone." I dropped my clipboard and scrambled to triangulate. The coordinates came clear, precise. Only problem, I'd seen that report in an archive weeks earlier. A Cessna had gone down in 1983, every passenger frozen before rescue arrived. The pilot's name was scratched into a memorial plaque on the very airfield where I'd landed. I told myself it was a prank, maybe some bush jokester spoofing frequencies. I wrote it down and tried not to hear the way his voice cracked, raw as if it were happening right then. The next night, it came again. Different voice. A woman. Snow caved in the shelter. "We're suffocating, please." Same coordinates. Same frantic tone. I dug deeper in the records. Sure enough, a group of hikers had died in a storm near that spot in '91. No survivors. No radio should have carried her voice across 30 years. Sleep turned thin. I stayed at the console, recording. I filled tapes with voices that begged, prayed, screamed, each linked to a tragedy long sealed in time. What gnawed at me wasn't just the sound of the dead. It was the way they called to me. My name laced itself into the static once, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. On the 12th night, the air froze around me. The fluorescent light buzzed, then dimmed. My headphones hissed, sharp like tearing cloth. A voice rose clean through the static. My voice. "This is Marcus Delcua, technician at Bethel Relay. I'm trapped. Can't get out. Please, if anyone hears me, don't stay." The words rattled every bone in me. I ripped the headset off, but the sound didn't stop. It filled the room as if the walls had become speakers. The version of me on the other end kept talking, breathing ragged, describing the exact console in front of me. He said the storm had locked him in, that something outside moved with the wind but wasn't the wind. He said the more he listened, the more he belonged to it. My throat went dry. I checked the weather. No storm yet, but the forecast showed one barreling in within 12 hours, a white wall that would bury the station for days. I looked at my bag. My contract said 6 weeks. My gut said now. I powered down every system, though the voices bled through the silence anyway. As I zipped my duffel, the radio sparked alive one last time. My double's voice came through, tired, broken. "If you're smart, you'll leave before the storm. Don't let them teach you how to listen. Don't become me." I didn't answer. I bolted into the brittle air, flagged down a passing supply plane with flares, and begged a ride back to Anchorage. I never collected my last paycheck. The company sent someone else to Bethel. I didn't ask who. Even now, when I sit in quiet rooms, I hear faint static behind the silence. I avoid radios. When I pass through airports, I walk faster past the PA's speakers, afraid they'll call my name. Because I know those weren't ghosts begging out there. They were people like me, people who stayed too long, who answered when the wilderness whispered. And I know one thing with a clarity sharper than any Alaskan wind. If I had stayed one more night, someone else would be hearing my distress call from those coordinates years after I was gone. And it wouldn't matter if they answered or not. Some signals never stop. They just wait for another ear. I took the job at the salmon cannery in Ketchikan because tuition doesn't wait and night shifts paid an extra $1 an hour. Most college kids went for tourism gigs in the summer. Guides, gift shops, whale watching, but I needed steady money, not tips. So when they handed me a hairnet, rubber boots, and an ID badge that smelled faintly of brine, I told myself it was temporary. Just one summer of fish guts, stainless steel, and fluorescent lights. The building itself looked like a ship run aground. Corrugated metal sides, conveyor belts running like arteries, and the constant churn of machines. Even at night, when production slowed, the air carried a wet tang that sank into your skin. My first week, I learned the rhythm. Hoppers clanging, belts squeaking, knives flashing. It was ugly work, but I told myself to keep my head down and imagine the scholarship bills shrinking with each paycheck. By my second week, things started bending. It was on a Tuesday, 2 a.m. I was mopping near the processing line when I heard the conveyor were to life. I froze. No one was supposed to be running machines after hours. The line clattered like it did during the day, the sound of fish sliding, knives clipping. But when I looked down the belt, it was empty. Metal teeth snapped through nothing, blades flashing against air. Then I saw them. Not people, not fully. Shapes of workers moving along the line, translucent, shoulders bent in rhythm. Their hands flickered silver with the shapes of salmon that weren't there. And those fish had eyes like coals, glowing green-blue, staring straight through me as if I were the one being gutted. I dropped them up. The clatter stopped instantly, as if my noise had startled them away. The line stood still. My mop clattered once more before lying quiet. I told myself it was fatigue, a trick of the fluorescent lights. But the smell of fresh-cut salmon lingered, sharp and metallic, when there hadn't been a single fish in the building since midnight. I didn't tell anyone. You don't last long in a cannery by spooking co-workers. But a few nights later, the line hummed again. This time, the shadows moved faster, slicing fish with practiced precision. Their knives never slipped, and always those glowing eyes stared. The fish were gutted, cleaned, packed by hands that weren't flesh anymore. It looked like an eternal shift no one had punched out of. That night, I ran outside for air. The dock glistened under the moon, wet with salt spray. I found one of the elders who worked security, a man named Harold who never seemed to need sleep. He smoked his pipe on the dock and watched me shiver like I'd just seen death, which maybe I had. "You saw them," he said simply. Not a question. I swallowed. "Who?" He puffed slow. "Not who. What?" "This cannery. Stand where the old fishing grounds used to be, before companies and belts and steel walls. Our people called this place a river's gift. Salmon came here every season, carrying the breath of ancestors. They swam so faithfully it was like a covenant." He looked past me at the building. The machines broke that covenant. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound stuck in my throat. "So, ghosts of salmon?" "Not ghosts." His eyes glinted in the moonlight. "Spirits. They keep migrating, even if the water is gone, even if their bodies are ground to paste. They remember. That night, when I went back in, the floor was slick with something that wasn't there. My boots squeaked through phantom blood. I heard chanting, not in English, not in anything I knew, woven with the hum of conveyors. The voices didn't sound angry. They sounded patient, eternal. I lasted the summer, mostly by avoiding the line when I could. I kept my head down, counted boxes, swept floors. But every few nights, the shift would return. The spectral workers, the glowing-eyed fish, the endless procession of knives and guts. They never looked tired. They never looked up, just worked and worked and worked. Sometimes, if I stood still enough, I could almost see their faces. Men and women carved from memory, cheekbones sharp with hunger, hands steady with tradition. It wasn't anger that filled the room. It was duty, the kind that doesn't die even when bodies do. On my last night before college started, the line came alive again. Stronger this time, louder. The smell of salmon filled the air, so thick I gagged. I walked closer than I ever had, heart batter in my ribs. One of the spectral fish slid past me, its glowing eyes locking with mine. And in that stare, I felt something, not threat, but a weight. A message. It wasn't words, but it carried meaning. Asterisk, we are still here. We still swim. Do not forget, asterisk. I backed away until the cold metal door clanged shut behind me. I don't work nights anymore. When I tell people about the cannery, I keep it light. Smells bad, hours worse. But sometimes, late at night, when a fan hums or a fridge kicks on, I hear the faint rhythm of a conveyor belt. And I see those eyes again, glowing through the dark. They remind me that some promises are too deep for concrete or steel to bury. The salmon still swim. The workers still work. And the river's gift is still being collected, one endless night shift at a time. I came to Reykjavik with nothing but camera gear and a hunger for the aurora. Photographers dream of it. The curtains of green, the violet fire, the way it dances like a living spirit. I wanted my own frame of it, something worth the frostbite and the red-eye flight from Anchorage. Locals warned me about the lights. Not just the cold, not just the wolves. The lights. They said the sky holds doors. They said some things try to walk through when the colors move too fast. I smiled politely and told myself folklore and art make good neighbors. Then I set up my tripod on the edge of the ice road and waited. The first night was perfect. The aurora spilled across the horizon, a slow river of green and white. My shutter clicked, the tripod shook gently in the wind, and I felt small in the best way. That's what the lights do. They humble you. The second night, the air was sharp enough to bite. The aurora pulsed brighter, stripes of crimson streaking the green. I framed my shot and pressed the shutter. Through the viewfinder, something moved. Not the curtains of light, not the stars. Shapes, tall black silhouettes bending inside the aurora, like shadows trying to climb down from the sky. They weren't tricks of light. They had weight depth. They stretched their long arms, pressing against the shimmer as if it were glass. I jerked my head up. Naked eye, nothing but light. Through the lens, the shapes, darker than dark, moving with purpose. My camera whirred, clicking frames. I felt a vibration in my chest, not sound exactly, but pressure like standing too close to a speaker. The longer I stared through the viewfinder, the more the shapes leaned toward me. One turned, its head, if that's what it was, tilted like a curious child. Then my camera died. Battery full when I left the truck, now stone dead. I fumbled for my backup. It powered for 1 second, long enough to flash a frame of green sky and black limbs pressing against it. Then it too went dead. Behind me, a whisper. Not English. Not any language I knew. A low chorus, layered voices rising and falling like wind through hollow wood. My breath steamed too thick, curling shapes I didn't make. I spun. The ice road stretched empty, the truck a lonely square in the distance. I ran. My boots slipped on frost, but I didn't stop until I slammed the door shut and locked it, as if locks could keep out whatever leaned through the sky. The radio crackled alive, even though it was off. A faint voice. Look up. I didn't. I kept my eyes on the steering wheel until the whispers faded. Only then did I dare look at the sky again. The aurora was calm, soft, like painted silk. No shadows, no arms pressing through. In the morning, I brought the dead cameras to a local repair shop. The owner popped out the batteries, frowned, and shook his head. Not drained, he said. Burned, like they ran too hot. He handed them back with a shrug that said he'd seen this before. I pressed him. What was it? He looked at me for a long time. Some say they're travelers, he said finally. From another place. Another time, the lights open the door. Most pass by. Sometimes they try to step through. And if they do, I asked. He didn't answer. That night, I stayed inside. I couldn't sleep, though. Through the frost-rimmed window, the aurora rose again, brighter than before. My hands itched for the camera, though it was fried useless. And when the curtain shifted, I swore I saw the long black shapes pressing once more, testing the sky like a membrane. I pulled the blanket over my head like a child, and I prayed the door would hold. I left Reykjavik 2 days early. The locals didn't ask why. Maybe they knew. Maybe they'd already seen the shadows in the aurora. I still shoot landscapes. But sometimes when I review my photos, mountains, lakes, star trails, I spot something I can't explain. A darker patch in the corner. A stretched silhouette too tall for the frame. I delete them fast, because I know what they are. And I know they're still pressing against the sky, waiting for one frame, one moment, one open door. I've mushed dogs since I was a kid in New Mexico, long before I ever dreamed of Alaska. By the time I entered the Iditarod, I'd learned to trust sled dogs more than engines, more than maps, sometimes more than my own instincts. When a dog refuses to move, it isn't laziness. It's a warning. That lesson saved me the night I reached the stretch locals whispered about, the trail that cuts through land the elders never marked on maps. They just called it the place of drones. The day had been long, the cold sharp enough to gnaw bones. My team pulled steady, breath puffing into little comets in the dark. The aurora rippled faint green above, enough light to see the trail where headlamp beams faltered. We'd covered close to 80 miles. I was calculating rest when my lead dogs, Willow and Bear, stopped dead. No barking, no lunging, just stiff as carved stone. The rest of the team piled into them, whining and snapping, but Willow didn't budge. I shouted, coaxed, even tugged on the gang line. Nothing. Their ears pressed flat, their eyes fixed on the trail ahead, where the snow looked no different from the last 100 miles. Then I heard it, a low beat like someone drumming on hollow wood. Slow, steady, traveling through the ground. My boots tingled with each pulse. Behind it came voices, not loud, but endless, weaving with the wind. They weren't English. Not Inupiaq, not Athabascan. Ancient, older than words I could place. I told myself it was wind playing tricks or my brain making patterns in fatigue. But the dogs knew better. They flattened to the ground, tails tucked, shoulders trembling. I stepped ahead, squinting at the trail. Snow swirled across it, little spirals of powder moving in rhythm with the drum beats. For one heartbeat, I thought I saw shapes in the snow, figures tall, bent at the shoulders, striding between the trees. Shadows too massive to be human. A story my grandfather once told me came back unbidden. The Tornersoot, giant spirits who punished those who disrespected the land. He'd say it like a campfire tale, voice low and playful. But here, in the still air, it didn't sound like fiction. The drumming grew louder. My chest thrummed with it. The voices wove around me, rising and falling, carrying grief and anger both. It felt like a warning and a demand. I tried again to pull Willow forward. She snapped, not at me, but at the empty air ahead. Her teeth clacked shut on nothing. The whole team howled, a ragged, broken sound. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, measured. Snow groaned under weight too vast to be seen. The air pressed down, thick as storm clouds. The aurora above flickered crimson, bleeding into the green like spilled paint. I backed up, hands shaking on the sled's handlebar. My breath fogged too thick, twisting into shapes that didn't match my lungs. Some instinct whispered, turn back. The trail ahead wasn't meant for me. I swung the sled around, awkward in the narrow path. The dogs surged the instant I gave them the command. Whatever held them before no longer did. They ran like the earth itself was chasing them. Paws scattering ice, lines pulling taut. Behind me, the drumming quickened, pounding like a heart too large for this world. The voices rose, shouting now, layered so thick they rattled my skull. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We tore down the trail until my legs ached from bracing. The sound followed, fading only when the aurora dimmed and the stars steadied. At the next checkpoint, I stumbled into the cabin half-frozen, muttering about drums. An elder volunteer put a blanket over my shoulders and listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded slowly. There's a trail there, she said. Old village stood once. People took more than the land offered. The Tornersoot made sure no one forgot. We tell mushers to avoid it. Sometimes they don't. Why didn't anyone mark it closed? I asked. Her eyes were sad. Because the land remembers better than signs. I slept fitful that night, dreams full of pounding drums and giants striding in the snow. In the morning, the dogs were calm again, eating greedily, tails wagging like nothing had happened. But Willow still refused to face the direction of that trail. She kept her back to it, ears pinned. We finished the race. People congratulated me. But when they asked about the hardest part, I didn't talk about storms or frostbite. I told them about the night the land itself said no. Even now, when I hear distant thunder, my chest fills with that same drumbeat. I know better than to think it's just weather. Some things out there keep walking, keep guarding, keep reminding us that not every trail is ours to take. And if you ever find yourself in the Iditarod and your dog stopped for no reason, listen to them. Turn back, because some footsteps on the snow aren't meant to be followed. I took the teaching job in Alaska because it paid double what I made in Boston and because, truthfully, I wanted a challenge. The school was small, a low building pressed against the edge of tundra. 20 kids, all ages in one room, half the desks scarred with initials carved by generations. My name is Caleb O'Sullivan, and that winter I learned there are lessons no teacher should ever witness. The first weeks were normal enough. Fractions, history, the awkward laughter of kids testing a new authority figure. But by the third week, I noticed something strange. My students were sharper than their grade level suggested. Too sharp. They solved equations before I finished writing them. They asked about philosophers I hadn't mentioned. One 8-year-old recited a line of Latin poetry perfectly, though she swore she'd never studied it. I chalked it up to boredom and bright kids with curious minds. Then I saw the time on the classroom clock one morning, 2:17 a.m. The hands weren't moving. I laughed, assuming a prank, until 3 students walked in yawning, their eyes glazed but purposeful. They sat down and began scribbling on the chalkboard, equations I couldn't follow. More students filed in, silent, moving like sleepwalkers. They worked in perfect unison, as if guided by unseen instructors. I told myself it was a dream. That explanation held until the next night. At exactly 2:17 a.m., I woke in my cabin to the sound of children's voices through the wind. The school was a 5-minute walk away. Against all sense, I dressed and went. The windows glowed faintly, though no power ran that late. I opened the door and froze. Every child was there, sitting perfectly upright at their desks, pencils scratching furiously. But the ones teaching them weren't human anymore. Shapes stood at the chalkboard, faint, translucent, adults bent with the posture of scholars. Their faces blurred, mouths moving soundlessly, yet the children answered, nodding, scribbling. On the board appeared diagrams of constellations not on any star map I knew, equations curving into spirals, languages older than Latin. When I stepped inside, the air went colder than the Alaskan night. The nearest shadow turned its head toward me. No eyes, just hollows, but I felt the weight of being noticed. My legs nearly buckled. The children didn't look at me. They were rapt, as if under a spell of learning too heavy to resist. A boy raised his hand. The shadow leaned down, whispering. His eyes widened with delight. He began writing symbols across his desk in chalk-white streaks. I shouted, "Enough!" my voice cracking in the silence. Instantly, the room stilled. The figures turned toward me in unison. And for one terrible moment, I heard them, not through ears, but inside my skull. Join us. Learn. Teach. Become. The children's heads snapped toward me. Faces slack, eyes reflecting that same emptiness. Their mouths opened in a single breath, repeating, learn. Teach. Become. I stumbled back, slamming the door. The chanting cut off like a radio, switched off. The school sat dark again, silent. When I returned in daylight, the children were normal. They didn't remember a thing. But on their desks were faint scratches, spirals, and symbols I didn't recognize. I stayed. Foolish pride, maybe, or fear of abandoning them. Each night after, I fought sleep, terrified I'd wake at 2:17. Sometimes I heard faint chalk scraping through the walls. Sometimes whispers threaded the wind. One night, curiosity outweighed fear. I opened a child's notebook. Among doodles of trees and snowflakes were equations describing orbits of planets I'd never heard of. In the margins, they said we're almost ready. I confronted an older student the next day, asking where he'd learned such things. His smile chilled me. They said, "You'll understand soon, Mr. O'Sullivan." The shadows wanted me. That much was clear. Each night, the pull grew stronger, a gravity dragging me toward that classroom. I barricaded my door, stuffed cotton in my ears, burned my lamp through the night. Still, at 2:17, I'd feel the weight of something leaning against my cabin walls, waiting. On my last night, I woke not to voices but silence so complete it rang in my skull. The clock on my nightstand read 2:17. I couldn't move. My body was pinned, like the bed itself had frozen. In the corner of my room stood one of the shadows, taller than the ceiling should allow. It bent toward me, mouth opening in a soundless word. The children's voices filled my head, overlapping. Come with us. Teach with us. Forever. I tore free, stumbling outside into the snow barefoot. I didn't stop until I reached the airstrip. I left that very morning, abandoning my post without explanation. Back in Boston, I still dream of the classroom, of chalk scratching symbols that eat themselves, of children's voices in harmony, chanting things no child should know. I hear 2:17 ticking closer each night, and I wonder how long before the shadows find me again. The district called me a coward, said I abandoned my contract. But I know the truth. I fled before those children stopped being children, before they became something else entirely, and maybe before I did too. Midnight sun in Alaska doesn't just stretch the day, it erases it. When I arrived in Fairbanks that June, the sky refused to dim. The sun hovered low but never left, turning the horizon into a bruised gold circle that never blinked. Most people complain about insomnia. I had come to study it. I am Dr. Priya Chatterjee-Moore, a neuroscientist specializing in sleep patterns. My project was simple on paper: measure the effects of continuous daylight on brainwaves. Volunteers wore EEG headsets while sleeping in our controlled dormitory. We logged hours, compared them with melatonin levels, looked for patterns of disruption. The first week gave us predictable results: fragmented REM cycles, delayed sleep onset, circadian rhythms bending like reeds in the current. The volunteers yawned through morning surveys. Nothing unusual, until one night, the headsets recorded something impossible. 3 participants showed identical spikes in their EEG graphs at exactly 3:12 a.m. The patterns weren't normal brainwaves. They were too synchronized, nearly identical down to the millisecond. When I overlapped the recordings, they formed a lattice of peaks and valleys, like a woven fabric. I asked them the next morning if they remembered anything. Each gave the same answer without hesitation. I dreamed of the river. No details at first, just that phrase. A river with no beginning or end. By the 3rd week, all 12 volunteers were reporting the same dream. The river flowed under a sun that never set. They walked along its banks and saw strangers who felt familiar, who spoke without moving their mouths. Each time they woke, they recalled more, names of people they'd never met, fragments of songs and languages they didn't know, visions of animals long extinct. The EEGs confirmed it. Their brains weren't just dreaming, they were networking. 12 minds firing in unison, exchanging signals, creating a shared landscape of thought. At first, I dismissed it as suggestion. One participant mentions a river, the others absorb it subconsciously. But then one volunteer, a young soldier named Eli, described meeting a woman in his dream, a woman with a scar across her cheek. The next morning, a nurse on our staff, who was not part of the study, admitted she'd dreamed of the same woman. She'd never told the volunteers. That shook me. The dreams deepened. Participants began sketching the river in their journals. The drawings were almost identical. Wide water, black as ink, lined with stones carved with spirals. In every sketch, figures stood on the opposite bank, tall and indistinct, watching. One night, I monitored live EEG feeds as the clock passed 3:12. Every headset flared at once, patterns weaving tighter than before. I leaned over Eli's chart just as his lips began moving in sleep. He whispered in Bengali, my mother's tongue. I hadn't spoken it in years, yet the words were clear. Your grandmother waits by the stones. My chest collapsed. My grandmother had died in Kolkata when I was a teenager. No one here knew that. The next day, Eli told me he'd met an old woman in the dream, sitting on the riverbank. She'd call my name. He described her shawl, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. Details only family could know. I nearly ended the study then. But science has claws. I told myself to keep recording. Week 4, the volunteers stopped reporting dreams. They called them visits. They woke in tears, claiming to have spoken with long-dead relatives. One woman swore she'd met her great-grandfather, who taught her a song in Aleut. She sang it aloud, voice shaking. When I searched archives, I found a recording of the same song, nearly extinct, preserved only in one museum collection. The data grew stranger. Their brainwaves no longer resembled normal REM. They pulsed in patterns more like group chanting. At times, their bodies twitched in unison, breathing aligned, as though one set of lungs filled all 12 chests. I tried joining them. I stayed awake for 3 nights, then let exhaustion drag me down under the light of the midnight sun. I wore no headset. I told myself I was only observing, but I found myself on the riverbank. It was endless. The water reflected a sun that wasn't a sun but a burning eye, lidless, unblinking. Across the river stood shadows shaped like people. They spoke inside me, not to me. They told me I was welcome. They told me the river was a bridge, and that our sleepless sun had thinned the veil. Among them, I saw my grandmother. She smiled, lifted her hand. I took one step toward the water. My foot sank into silt colder than ice. The figures beckoned. The river pulled. A hand seized my arm. Eli. His eyes were empty, pupils gone white. Not yet, he said. They want you too much. I woke screaming, my sheets soaked, the lights blinding. The next night, the volunteers didn't wake at all. Their EEGs showed constant activity, woven patterns thick as ropes. Hours passed, but they stayed locked in REM. Their lips moved with silent words. Their fingers drummed patterns on the mattress in unison. Medical staff tried shaking them, injecting stimulants. Nothing worked. Their bodies lived, but their minds were elsewhere, anchored on the river. And then the EEG screens began showing a 13th pattern, perfectly synchronized with theirs. I wasn't wearing a headset, but the machine displayed it anyway. My brain, woven with theirs. The power cut out at that moment. The emergency lights failed. Only the eternal daylight bled through the blinds. In that dim silence, I heard voices rise, layered and endless, coming from the volunteers' mouths. Not their voices. Hundreds, thousands, chanting in languages that made my bones tremble. The sound pressed against me like a tide. My own mouth began to form words I didn't know. I clamped my jaw until it hurt. And then, just as suddenly, the voices stopped. The volunteers gasped awake, eyes wide, bodies shaking. They cried, begged, clung to each other. None would tell me what they'd seen, only that the figures across the river had stepped closer. I ended the study the next day, burned the data drives, shipped the volunteers home. I can't burn what's in my head. Every night since, no matter where I am, I wake at 3:12 sharp. I hear the river. Sometimes I see the stones. Sometimes I smell the wet silt. My grandmother's voice calls my name more clearly with each passing week. I don't know how long I can resist stepping into the water. I don't know what waits if I do. They told me winter in Kotzebue would make me quiet. They were right. Cold does that. it steals extra words first. I came up as a volunteer EMT, then stayed long enough to join the search and rescue team. We worked out a garage that smelled like gas and wet wool, with orange sleds stacked along a wall and maps taped over cinder block. The work was simple. When a call crackled in, we went. We carried people out of the snow and brought them home when we could. When we couldn't, we carried their names. The first call that winter came at dusk, which in February is most of the day. Our dispatcher pushed it through on the VHF. Weak beacon ping, northeast of town, past the river bend where the willows crouch. The coordinates landed on the same square of map I'd marked for training, an old approach path used by bush pilots. We gassed the sleds, zipped our parkas, and went. I rode second behind our lead, a mechanic named Leroy who knew the land by feel. The ice was hard as iron. Our skis hissed, headlamps tunneling through powder. The beacon tone rode the radio, steady, small, human. We found a cluster of broken spruce and a scatter of aluminum the size of my hand. The wreck was old, snow-worn into a silver skeleton. Someone had cut the tail out years ago for scrap. No bodies, no fresh tracks. The beacon tone pulsed in our ears anyway. Probably a bad reflection, Leroy said, though his mouth didn't believe it. Old signals bounce weird out here. I knelt and brushed eyes from a rivet until the numbers stamped there showed. The serial matched a crash report I'd read in the file cabinet. Winter of '79, 2 dead, beacon never found. We shut our radios off on the way home, pretending we didn't hear the ping follow us all the way to the garage. 2 nights later, another distress call, another set of coordinates. Same patch of map, same patient tone. We went again. This time the snow gave up old cap trapped in willow, stiff as a shell. Inside the cap, a name tag peeled away to show ink faded to a gray whisper. The date stamped on the tag's back was 1993. I bagged it with gloved hands, wrote the location, felt the ping thread the bones of my wrist like a friend tapping from inside the wall. The third night the call didn't wait for dark. It arrived at noon, thin sun hanging like a bad bulb. The dispatcher's voice was tight. Multiple pings now. Same quadrant. On the map, the dots stacked, a column of ghosts. We loaded rope and shovels. A young ranger from the guard unit asked if we needed extra hands. Leroy told him to eat hot stew and stay close to town. I told him to call his mother when the weather cleared. He laughed, then saw our faces and stopped. We drove our sleds north until the line of cottonwoods ran out and the world became only white and sound. The pings braided our radios into one long plea. I kept my eyes on Leroy's taillight and the compass clipped to my chest. The GPS in my pocket sulked, then spun, then settled, then spun again. My breath kept fogging inside the balaclava in the shape of words I didn't say. I counted numbers to push them out, 1, 2, 3, until my jaw stopped wanting to answer. The land there rises without show, a swell in the ice, as if something underneath is trying to breathe. We crested the rise and saw it. An ice formation like a cathedral fallen on its side. Ribs of blue frozen in a curve, wind polishing the outer skin to glass. Inside those ribs, the world had been filed away. Wings of an old plane, the red hood of a snow machine, a hunting sled, its runners caught mid-glide. And between the artifacts, flesh, faces behind fogged ice, cheeks pale and collapsed, lashes furred with crystals, mouths halfway to forming names. They were arranged without plan, some upright, some tipped, caught where time let go. Leroy cut his engine, and the sudden quiet made the ping louder. Not through the radio now, from inside the ice, as if the formation itself spoke in that small machine voice. I swallowed and tasted metal. We circled the thing wide. My headlamp struck reflective tape from a parka sleeve, trapped a few feet in. A hand pressed against the blue, pale and still. The fingers curled, then relaxed as the wind shifted, and I realized it hadn't moved at all. My eyes wanted a motion my body couldn't afford. I was still staring when someone stopped their sled behind us. An elder stepped off, small as a child inside a fur ruff, boots whispering over crusted snow. Her name was Anna. I'd seen her at the clinic, speaking softly to families when news went bad. She stood beside me, hands folded into her sleeves, and did not look away from the ice. "You found a collection place," she said. A phrase like that should have sounded fanciful. Instead, it was a key that fit the lock in my chest. "What is it?" I asked. "Not what," she said. "Where?" Long ago, people told it different ways. Some say a big spirit made a basket of eyes for those who get lost. Some say the land takes pity and keeps them from blowing apart. Some say it is a place where time gets thin. What I know is this: when the wind turns and the light stays wrong, the ones caught out here want to come home. They do not have feet anymore, so they use whatever calls across distance. The old ones use songs. Now the lost use beacons and radios. They borrow them and call. People like you listen. Her eyes went to the GPS on my chest. The screen had woken itself. It showed my coordinates, then blinked. The arrow that should have pointed north turned and pointed into the ice. I clicked it off. It clicked back onto my pocket. "The calls lead you here," Anna said, not unkind. "If you come up close, they will try to make space for you." A tiny thing in me wanted to laugh. Another wanted to cry. I chose neither and tightened my glove straps like it mattered. "We can cut people out," I said, hearing the EMT training rise up like a reflex. "We have saws, heat blankets. We can do something. Some of them have been here longer than you've been alive," she said. "Heat will crack and hurt them more. And for the newest ones," she nodded toward a face close to the surface, lips slightly parted, beard caught in a ripple of ice. "Their bodies will say no even if your hands say yes. The land has claimed them." Leroy murmured my name, and when I glanced back, he was staring at the radio strapped to my shoulder. It had switched channels without my touch. On the emergency frequency, a voice breathed. It was my own, recorded on some old training tape, repeating the phonetic alphabet. The vowels were wrong, stretched thin like gum pulled between fingers. I stripped the radio from my harness and yanked the battery. The voice continued, thin, now not quite mine. The sound came from the ice. We backed away another few steps. The hum of pings braided and unbraided, finding a pattern, then losing it. The blue ribs of the formation caught our lamps and sent the light in odd angles, cutting our shadows into many. "We need to mark this coordinate," Leroy said, voice careful, as if the formation could hear tone. "Keep the weekend snowmakiners from blundering in." "We'll mark it," Anna said, "but markings blow away." She crouched and pressed her mitten to the snow. "We will also tell people. Telling is better. And you," she looked up at me, "must take care of your own calling." The things that know your name," she said. "Your beacon, your phone, your radio. They are threads. Cut them for a while. I need them to work." She tilted her head. "You need them not to work here." I reached into my jacket and felt heat bloom where my personal locator beacon sat. The device was supposed to remain inert until I flipped the safety cap and pushed the SOS button. It throbbed in my gloved palm like a small heart. Through the plastic window, the LED winked, green, 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 then shifted to red, the pattern reserved for a live distress call. I had not opened the cap. I had not pressed anything. The beacon was sending my position to the satellites and saying, in my name, "Help. I'm here." The arrow on the GPS swung fully toward the ice and stayed there, as if the world only had one direction now. And I flipped the safety cap and smashed the beacon's button to off. The LED kept winking red. I tore the battery out. The light did not die. "Okay," I said too loud. My voice made a rim of white on the air. Okay. A hummingbird panic rattled my ribs. I turned and walked away from the formation too fast, boots scuffing, the rational part of my brain wobbling like a book on a broken shelf. Behind us, the pings braided into something that almost sounded like a chorus trying to pronounce my last name. I didn't look back. By the time we reached the sleds, the sky had gone the gray of a withheld breath. Wind carried fine snow like smoke. Leroy started his engine and jerked his chin toward town. I swung a leg over and felt the tug on the lanyard for my beacon again. The device, battery dangling, knocked against my chest, the red LED stubborn as a wound. I shoved it into my pack, then stopped, pulled it out, and pressed it deep into a drift. The light burned through snow like an eye. I kicked snow over it until the drift swallowed it whole. Anna watched, face unreadable inside her ruff. "Leave a gift," she said, "for the place. For the ones who want what they used to have. A small thing they can carry without weight." All I had was a packet of jerky, a braided bracelet my niece had made me, and a metal EMT shears I'd carried since training. I laid the jerky on the snow, then the bracelet. The shears I couldn't give up. After a second, I unclipped my spare compass and set it down too. Anna nodded once. "Go," she said, not to us, but toward the wind. We rode back in a low white fever. The storm wasn't full yet, but the land had changed mind. Snow came from odd angles, as if thrown. My headlamp haloed ice and failed to stick to anything. The engine's vibration felt wrong in my knees, half-step behind itself. Twice I smelled diesel strong as a spill, looked down expecting to see a leak, found nothing. The radio, battery removed and stowed, whispered anyway, soft, the way people speak in hospital rooms at night. I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, until the sound fell under the engine's note and stayed there like a hooked fish. We made the garage before the real whiteout. The door rolled down and cut the world into safe and not. Inside, my legs shook so hard I had to sit. Leroy handed me a cup of coffee I didn't remember asking for. I wrapped both hands around it and watched the door, certain the red LED would glow under the crack and make its way in. Word went around town by supper. You can't keep something like that quiet. People came by the garage to stand with us in the smell of gas and wool and speak in the low way people use when death is nearby, but not in the room. Someone said they'd heard there were travelers frozen in there from the 50s, the 70s, last year. Someone else said their granduncle had seen it once and never walked that way again. Anna stood in a corner like part of the wall. When she told the story, she didn't say it big or small. She said it the way weather is said. It comes, you plan, you don't make it personal. I slept at the clinic that night because the generator there hums loud enough to push other hums away. I dreamed of red lights blinking under ice, each blink a name. I woke to my phone vibrating though I had turned it off. On the screen, a notification I'd never seen, a location share I had not enabled, pinned a spot northeast of town with a small heart beside it. Beneath, a message, "Help, I'm here." The sender field was empty. The timestamp was 1979. I threw the phone face down and breathed into my hands until the trembling let go. Then I wrapped the phone in foil from the clinic kitchen, put the wrap package in a metal first aid box, and put the box in the freezer. It felt silly. It also felt like putting a screaming kettle behind two doors. For a week, I didn't answer night calls. Others went. We agreed without saying it that some calls weren't for us. We marked the map with a small circle and told new volunteers never to cut across there even if the GPS loved the line. We checked each other's gear for hidden pings and taped over microphones. I started carrying a paper map like a talisman, folded soft from use. I wrote names in pencil and said them aloud only when it was necessary and bright. The storm cleared and the ice held and the town kept moving. That's the other thing Alaska teaches you, how to go on. The work returned to simple, bringing people back from close to. I started answering calls again, first on clear days, then an honest night. I found I could tell the difference now, by ear, between a beacon that wants a body and a beacon that wants a witness. The wanting itself has a tone. Sometimes, the radio still hisses my surname and tries to make a song. I'll lower the volume and look up at whatever sky is on duty and keep my mouth shut. Sometimes I dream of the blue ribs of ice and the way things look soft behind glass. In those dreams I hear small mechanical hearts calling, patient as snow. Help, I'm here. I wake and put my palm against the wall and feel for a pulse that shouldn't be there. It isn't. Not yet. I didn't get quiet because the cold stole my words. I got quiet because the land taught me where words go when you let them wander. They go into radios and beacons and ice. They come back changed. If you follow every voice, you will end up in a place that holds on. I still carry a locator beacon because I have to, because people expect me to find them and be found. But I keep its battery in a different pocket, wrapped in cloth. I use a compass with a needle that swings at a speed I can understand. I listen to elders who say the old stories with a straight face. And when a call comes in that stacks on a square of map, where coordinates gather like crows, I write the name of the caller in my log. Then I close the book and set it gently on the shelf. You can love the lost and still choose the road that returns you. That is what Anna told me later, over tea that steamed like a small, warm storm. Bring home the ones who can walk, she said. For the others, learn to stand and speak their names without stepping into their winter. I think about that when the garage door opens and the night leans in, a single unbroken piece. I clip on my radio and check that it is only a tool and not a thread. I look at the map and choose lines that lead home. And I go. I came to the North Slope for numbers, not omens. I'm Dr. James Wilson, climatologist, and the station here at Kjavik was supposed to be a quiet post with big data. Wind roses, temperature curves, radio sound launches that rose into the polar night like patient sparks. Winter here is one long hour. You learn to trust instruments the way sailors trust stars. The station sat on a low ridge above the frozen sea, a modular building bolted to steel pilings, its guy wires humming in the wind. Inside, a lab bench, a bunk, a galley, racks of sensors, and a window that looked into nothing. Every morning at 0900, morning by clock, not sky, I logged the overnight data, calibrated the anemometers, and checked the ceilometer's thin beam, cutting snowflakes into math. I drank coffee strong enough to stain thought and wrote notes as if the world were a well-behaved experiment. The first anomaly looked almost like a prank. At 2:13, the thermometer reported a 30-degree spike in 4 seconds, then a fall even sharper. Not a blip, sustained for 2 minutes, recorded by 2 independent sensors, both recently calibrated. The wind data, taken at 10 meters, said the air shifted from east to west of nowhere, then to a speed so high the logger replaced it with asterisks, the device's way of saying, I saw something I do not name. I went outside to check the cups. The night had that hard clamp sound you only get when it is 50 below and the world is a crystal you can knock with a fingernail. My headlamp found the tower, wires singing low. No hoarfrost on the bearings. No ice clogging the veins. The only movement was the slow roll of aurora far off, a dim bruise over the horizon. When I came back in, the loggers hummed like content animals. The spike lay there like a stone in a stream. 5 nights later, the station measured pressure waves that made no sense. 3 pulses, evenly spaced, the exact period of a passing train. There are no trains here. The frequency analysis suggested a mass moving past us that would shame any airship. The ice did not crack. The sky did not change. On the printout, the pulses stood in clean black peaks, polite and undeniable. I sent the data to the main office with a note that was all hedges. Possible instrument interference. Investigating. I told myself that cables arc, batteries sulk, software dreams. I told myself a lot of things that night, out loud, because in the polar dark you must fill space with your own voice or other voices will volunteer. On a supply run, I asked a local elder named Naluk if he'd ever heard of the air going fast and slow at once. He lifted a shoulder. Around that ridge, he said, nodding toward my station, the winter has more than one face. Old people say there's a shadow there. Not dark like night, but dark like time. On certain nights, the land is many lands at once, and the old winds and the new winds pass each other without fighting. What do you call it? I asked. A time shadow, he said. When it comes, people say the dogs won't sleep and the lights inside lean the wrong way. Lean. He smiled at the word. You will know if you see it, he said, like a parent telling a child what thunder is. Back at the station the next week, I saw it. It was 1:03 by the wall clock. I was grinding coffee and listening to the heater cycles when the fluorescent tubes over the bench made a slow tilt. Not physically, not a sagging fixture, but a leaning of light as if brightness itself had weight and had decided to rest on one elbow. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, checked the voltage on the inverter. Normal. The lights kept their odd slant. The data came in crooked too. The oscillometer reported a cloud base at -12 meters. The beam convinced the ground was above the sky. The sonic anemometer alternated between calm and gale in a rhythm so regular it could have been a heartbeat. On the HF receiver I kept for auroral hiss, a whisper rose that wasn't hiss at all, but the thin grammar of speech sped up and cut short. This is the part where I should have labeled files and waited. I didn't. I put on my parka, clipped my tether line to the porch eyelet, and stepped outside into a night as dense as coal. When the door shut, the building whirled itself behind me, humming. The tether paid out in small clicks as I walked along the skids toward the tower. The dark had depth that night, layers like glass. I stood at the base of the mast and felt wind from two directions on the same cheek. The aurora brightened for a moment and then went out like a breath pinched thumb and finger. The guy wires sang 3 notes at once. I turned to go back and saw light in the station window. Not my light. It was incandescent and warm, butter-colored, the sort used decades ago, and it flickered with the rhythm of a generator I'd only read about in maintenance logs. A figure moved behind the glass, then another shadow on yellow. I called out, "Hey," and the name died in my balaclava. The door I had just come through showed a different door, a narrow wooden one with paint scabbed from cold, a push bar shinier than mine. I walked toward it because humans walk toward light, because I am not as original as I like. The tether line tightened, keeping a plain promise. You can go this far and no farther. I reached the limit, leaned into the strap, and saw through the window a man in an old parka pinning paper charts to a corkboard. His hair had the long sideburn look of photographs from the 70s. He lifted his head sharply, as if hearing a noise. He looked toward the door and right through me. He spoke to someone I couldn't see. His lips made the shapes of familiar station words, barograph, radio sound, inversion, but they came out wrong, too slow, then too fast, then overlaid so that 2 sentences were being said at once with the same mouth. His hands trembled as he smoothed the map. Behind him, the old clock on the wall read 1:03, and then 1:03 again, then again, as if time had been cut into cards and shuffled and dealt the same number each time. A shape passed between us and the glass. The reflection of another light from a distant hallway that didn't exist in my building. My breath froze into a small cloud and hung there like a moth. I stumbled back to the tower and clipped my tether into another eyelet, as if a second knot could anchor me to only one now. I stared at the snow and counted my own breath, 1, 2, 3, 4, until the light inside shifted back to fluorescent, firm and flat. When I looked again, my window showed my lab bench, my mug, my lamp, my notebook open to the page where I had underlined the word asterisks twice. The leaning of the light ended like a held note dropped. I did not sleep. I logged everything and sent a second message to the main office that was a little less hedge. I added, possibility of atmospheric ducting interacting with power systems. I did not add, I met the 70s. 3 days later, a radiosonde launch went wrong. The balloon rose. The radiosonde pinged temperature and humidity like a good child. The antenna tracked. Then the numbers went textbook. So textbook, I smiled. Then they went crazy. Arctic summer warmth in a polar night. And then the signal split. 2 streams came in from 2 antennas, both tagged with my sonde's ID. One showing high altitude data and one showing surface data from a day with different wind. The timestamps on both feeds read 103. I held the printouts and felt a longing I had not felt since grad school. The desire to keep digging until the ground gave me the thing under it. It is a dangerous desire. It sounds like devotion. It can be a trap. At 23:40 that night, the HF receiver whispered again. The voice this time was not a stranger's. It was mine, aged and tired, a thread pulled thin. James, it said, laid over static and hum. If you hear me, you have to leave before the next event. The station has you now. Before it sets its hands, go. I froze, then laughed in the way people laugh when a glass breaks and they weren't touching it. Very funny, I said to the empty lab, to the rack of blinking LEDs. The laugh did not steady me. I shut off the receiver and it kept speaking, because of course it did, because either the sound was in the wire or around it or above it, because the difference here had begun to be academic. I made a plan like a person who still believes plans are stronger than weather. I packed the snow machine with a grab kit and tools. I stowed the hard drives in a Pelican case, snapped it twice, wrote a letter for Nalook with a quick sketch of the pressure wave pattern. I left the generator warm for a quick start. I set my alarm for 22:30 so I could watch the data through midnight and leave at 0:30. I wrote that like it mattered. The clock wrote 103 in its head and waited for me to notice. At 22:31, the station leaned again. You can't call it anything else. The floor remained flat. My body knew better. The lights tilted. The air changed its sound from one small nothing to another. The heater paused and did not resume. I went to the window and saw the old station again, then a newer one, then my own, then the old one, like a child flipping a book of drawings to make a cartoon run. The door opened and a man stepped in from a wind I could not hear. He had the 70s hair and the scab paint on his door. He took off his mittens and blew into his hands, and then saw me, really saw me, and relief and horror passed over his face like weather. You can see me, he said, not a question. I can now, I said. What year is it for you? 1977, he said. We kept seeing 1958. Then the 30s for a night, wool coats and a stove. Then a winter where the sea ice breathed like a living thing. We thought we were lucky. We were not. You're stuck in a loop, I said. We are the loop, he said, with a small, patient smile that made me want to leave and stay at the same time. Can you leave? I asked. When let's go, yes, he said, but it loosens its hands less each year. He glanced at my clock. It read 103. His did too. How long? Don't, he said. You think measuring saves you. It's what I thought. Listen, the next one is bigger. The pressure waves stack. The light will lean, so far will be a floor. If you are on it, you'll walk somewhere you didn't plan and not come back the same. Pack your data if you must. But go. The building shifted again. The coffee on the bench leaned inside the mug. The lid on the Pelican case clicked open by itself. He looked past me at the racks of drives and shook his head with a kind of gentle pity that had no mockery in it. They trained us to hold onto numbers. You have to let them hold themselves. He stepped backward toward a door that wasn't my door. If you make it out, tell them we kept working. Tell them we didn't stop for nothing. That's all anyone will understand. Your name? I asked, though I knew I should not ask names of the past year. He shook his head. They'll find it on the log if they need it. He pulled his hood up. Go now, James. He was gone. The door I looked at was mine again. The clock ticked to 1:03 and stayed. I snapped the pelican case shut. I pulled on my gloves. I clipped my tether, then unclipped it and looped it twice, as if more rope could anchor me to my own hour. The wind outside had no speed, no direction, only pressure. I opened the door and the night came in, slow and heavy as water. Snow fell up for a moment and then remembered down. The snow machine's starter whined, then caught. I lashed the case to the rack, checked the compass that does not care about time when it works, and found it trying to point toward the station no matter how I turned. I put it in my pocket and used my eyes. The trail marks glowed the way cheap tape glows when you want it to. Each reflector was a small promise. I took the first and then the next. Behind me, the building lights shifted through decades like a hand flipping slides. For a breath, I saw a lamp glow and a stovepipe. For a breath, I saw a bank of analog meters with needles quivering like nerves. For a breath, I saw nothing at all, a dark so clean it could have been the first night. The snow machine sledged forward. I did not look back again. After a mile, the air unhooked from whatever had it and moved like air. The compass needle woke and faced north with dignity. My breath fogged like an honest stove. The clock on my wrist leapt to 0:17, and then to 3:34, and then settled at 23:08, as if embarrassed by its own behavior. In town, the generator lights made copper halos on the snow. I drove to the community building and sat in the idling machine until my hands stopped trembling. Naluk came out in his parka, unhurried, as if he'd been waiting for any version of me that might arrive. "Time shadow," he said, and I nodded, unable to pretend I had a better term. "It has good bait," I said. "Data. Work. The feeling you are about to know something no one else knows." He chuckled slow. "That place was teaching long before your machines. It likes students who don't blink." "I almost stayed," I said. "You left," he said. "Sometimes that is the lesson." I mailed the hard drive south with no letter. I resigned by phone and said words like family and health because the truth makes more trouble. I wrote a different truth in my notebook, the one that lives in the back of a drawer, that there are places where time is not a river but a tidal, where things get caught and circle and sometimes wash free. That some data sets are traps. That respect is also a method. I still work in climate, but now I keep a paper log side by side with the cloud upload. I stand outside more, counting seconds between gusts, tasting the air for snow iron. I listen when elders say the lights lean, and when my receiver picks up a whisper around 1:03, a voice with my own weariness in it saying go. I don't call it superstition. I call it advice. If you ever run a station on that ridge, tie a second knot in your tether and keep your compass where your hand can find it without looking. When the light leans, remember the floor has not moved, even if everything in you says otherwise. If a door opens on a room that should not be there, let someone else inventory its contents. Your job is to go on. We were trained to stay for the last decimal place. Out there, the last place is you. Leave a hole.